Welcome back, dear viewers, to another chilling tale of mystery and the supernatural. Hi, everyone. Today I have a spine-tingling story that will make you think twice the next time you step into your favorite coffee shop. So, grab your favorite cup of coffee, sit back, and prepare yourself for Dark Brews, a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one. Let's dive into the mystery. The rain fell steadily outside, a constant backdrop to the hum of the espresso machines and the chatter of customers at the Starbucks on Fifth Avenue. Steve had worked as a barista for the past 3 years, blending into the background of the bustling coffee shop. He was diligent, always on time, and rarely spoke unless necessary. His co-workers, like Sarah, the energetic shift supervisor, and Tom, the friendly part-time barista, often tried to engage him in conversations, but Steve preferred to keep to himself. His routine was predictable. Wake up, go to work, make coffee, and go home. One regular customer, Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who always ordered a black coffee and read the newspaper by the window, seemed to take a particular interest in Steve. They exchanged pleasantries daily, with Mr. Thompson often sharing snippets of his life, while Steve listened politely. Steve's life was marked by its predictability. Every morning he woke up at 5 a.m., showered, and had a cup of black coffee before heading to work. The rain was a constant companion, a reminder of the Seattle climate he had grown accustomed to. The Starbucks on Fifth Avenue was more than just his workplace. It was a refuge from the world outside, a place where he could lose himself in the rhythm of brewing coffee and serving customers. Despite his quiet demeanor, Steve was observant. He knew the names and orders of most of the regular customers. There was Mrs. Grant, who always ordered a caramel macchiato, and Mr. Jenkins, who preferred a double shot of espresso. Steve enjoyed the small interactions, the brief moments of connection that punctuated his otherwise solitary existence. One rainy morning, Mr. Thompson didn't show up. At first, no one thought much of it. People missed their coffee runs now and then. But as days turned into a week, the absence of the familiar old man became noticeable. Sarah mentioned it during a slow afternoon shift. "Have you seen Mr. Thompson lately?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Steve shook his head. "No, not for a while." The conversation was brief, but it planted a seed of unease in Steve's mind. That night, he found it hard to sleep, his thoughts drifting to the missing customer. Mr. Thompson's absence was a void in the routine that Steve found unsettling. The following week, a police officer came into the Starbucks. Officer Daniels, a stern-looking man with a thick mustache, asked to speak with the staff, mentioning that Mr. Thompson's family had reported him missing. The news sent a ripple of shock through the team. Steve felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead as Officer Daniels questioned each employee. When it was Steve's turn, the officer's sharp eyes seemed to pierce through him. "Did you notice anything unusual the last time Mr. Thompson was here?" Officer Daniels asked. Steve shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "No, nothing." The questioning continued for days, and Steve couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, scrutinized. He started seeing shadows in the corners of his vision, hearing whispers that faded as soon as he turned to look. The once comforting routine of the Starbucks became a source of anxiety. As the investigation progressed, Steve became increasingly paranoid. He began to notice small changes in the behavior of his co-workers and customers. Sarah and Tom seemed more distant, their conversations becoming hushed whispers whenever Steve approached. The regular customers who once greeted him warmly now avoided eye contact. Steve's unease grew when he started receiving strange messages on his phone. The texts were anonymous, filled with cryptic warnings and threats. "We know what you did," one message read. "You can't hide forever," said another. Steve tried to trace the messages, but they always led to dead ends. Desperate to clear his name, Steve began to investigate Mr. Thompson's disappearance on his own. He visited the elderly man's apartment, speaking with neighbors and gathering any information he could find. One neighbor mentioned seeing Mr. Thompson with a younger man the night he disappeared, but the description was vague. Steve's search led him to the library, where he delved into the history of the building. He discovered that the Starbucks was built on the site of an old hotel that had burned down decades ago. Rumor had it that the hotel had a hidden room, a place where unspeakable things had happened. Late one night, armed with a flashlight, Steve searched the storage room again. After hours of searching, he found a loose panel in the wall. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. His heart pounding, Steve descended the stairs, each step echoing in the confined space. At the bottom, he found a small, dusty room filled with old furniture and yellowed newspapers. In the center of the room was an old diary, its pages filled with the ramblings of a madman. As Steve read the diary, he learned the horrifying truth. The hotel's owner had been a serial killer, luring victims to the hidden room where he conducted gruesome experiments. The spirits of his victims were trapped in the building, their restless souls seeking revenge. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and Steve felt a presence behind him. He turned to see the ghostly figure of Mr. Thompson, his eyes filled with sorrow and rage. The spirits had mistaken Steve for the hotel's owner, their tormentor. Desperate to escape, Steve tried to run, but the spirits blocked his path. He fell to his knees, begging for mercy. The ghosts loomed closer, their faces twisted in anger. Just as they were about to reach him, the room filled with a blinding light. Steve looked up to see Officer Daniels standing at the top of the stairs, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Steve, come on!" the officer shouted. Steve scrambled to his feet and ran up the stairs, the spirits wailing behind him. He and Officer Daniels barely made it out before the hidden room sealed itself shut. The police investigated the hidden room, uncovering the remains of the hotel's victims. The spirits were finally at peace, and the haunting stopped. The Starbucks closed for renovations, and the staff were relocated to other stores. Steve was cleared of any suspicion in Mr. Thompson's disappearance, but the experience left him deeply scarred. He quit his job and moved away, trying to forget the horrors he had witnessed. Months later, a new Starbucks opened on the same site. The building had been thoroughly renovated, but those who knew its dark history could never quite shake the feeling that the spirits of the past still lingered, watching and waiting. Months later, Steve had moved to a new city and tried to start a new life. He found a job at a small coffee shop, far from the bustling Starbucks. The new environment was a stark contrast to his previous workplace. The pace was slower, the customers fewer, and the atmosphere more relaxed. Yet, the memories of the hidden room and the spirits haunted him. Steve's nights were plagued with nightmares. He often woke up in a cold sweat, his heart racing. In his dreams, he saw Mr. Thompson's ghostly figure reaching out to him, whispering accusations. The nightmares grew more intense, blending reality and fiction, until Steve could no longer distinguish between the two. One evening, as he was closing the coffee shop, Steve received a phone call. The number was unknown, but he answered it anyway. The voice on the other end was distorted, but he could make out the words. "We know what you did, Steve. You can't escape." Steve's blood ran cold. He hung up the phone and looked around the empty shop, feeling the weight of the unseen eyes watching him. He knew he couldn't ignore the call. The past was catching up to him, and he needed answers. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Steve returned to Seattle. He needed to confront the source of his nightmares and put the spirits to rest once and for all. He visited the newly renovated Starbucks, now bustling with customers unaware of the building's dark past. Steve entered the coffee shop, his eyes scanning the familiar yet changed interior. The walls were painted a bright, welcoming color, and the furniture was modern and stylish. But the air felt heavy, as if the building itself remembered. Steve approached the counter, where a young barista greeted him with a smile. He ordered a black coffee and took a seat by the window, the same spot where Mr. Thompson used to sit. As he sipped his coffee, memories of the hidden room flooded his mind. Determined to find the truth, Steve waited until closing time. He watched as the staff cleaned up and the customers left. Once the last employee locked the door and the lights dimmed, Steve made his move. He found the loose panel in the storage room and descended the narrow staircase once more. The air grew colder as he reached the bottom, and the room seemed untouched since his last visit. The old furniture and yellowed newspapers were still there, but the diary was missing. Steve searched the room, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. He felt a presence behind him and turned to see the ghostly figure of Mr. Thompson, his eyes filled with sorrow and rage. "Why did you come back?" Mr. Thompson's voice was a ghostly whisper. "I need to know the truth," Steve replied, his voice trembling. "Why are you haunting me?" Mr. Thompson's ghostly figure flickered, his expression softening. "The hotel's owner, the one who trapped us here. He's not gone. His spirit still lingers, feeding on our fear." Steve felt a chill run down his spine. "How do I stop him?" "You must find his remains and destroy them," Mr. Thompson said. "Only then will we be free." Steve nodded, his resolve strengthening. He would put an end to the hauntings and free the spirits trapped in the building. He began searching the room, looking for any clues that might lead him to the hotel owner's remains. Steve's search led him to an old photograph hidden beneath a pile of newspapers. The photograph showed a group of people standing in front of the hotel, with the owner prominently featured in the center. Steve recognized the man's face from the diary's description. He flipped the photograph over and saw a handwritten note, buried beneath the foundation. Armed with this new information, Steve knew what he had to do. He needed to dig beneath the building's foundation and find the remains of the hotel owner. It was a daunting task, but he was determined to see it through. Steve returned to the Starbucks during the day, pretending to be a curious historian interested in the building's past. He spoke with the manager, explaining his interest and requesting access to the basement. The manager, intrigued by Steve's story, granted him permission. That evening, Steve descended into the basement, equipped with a shovel and a flashlight. The air grew colder as he dug, the sound of the shovel striking the concrete echoing in the confined space. Hours passed, and Steve's muscles ached, but he didn't stop. Finally, his shovel struck something hard. He cleared the dirt and uncovered an old wooden box, its surface covered in dirt and grime. With trembling hands, Steve opened the box and found a set of bones, along with a decaying journal. Steve's heart raced as he read the journal. The hotel owner had documented his gruesome experiments, detailing the torment he inflicted on his victims. The journal confirmed what Steve had feared: the owner's spirit was bound to the remains. With determination, Steve gathered the bones and carried them outside. He found an empty lot nearby and built a fire. As the flames consumed the bones, Steve recited a prayer, hoping to release the spirits trapped in the building. The air grew still, and a sense of calm washed over Steve. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see Mr. Thompson's ghostly figure, his expression peaceful. "Thank you," Mr. Thompson said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We are free." Steve watched as Mr. Thompson's figure faded into the night, the spirits finally at peace. He felt a weight lift from his shoulders, knowing he had done the right thing. The hauntings at the Starbucks ceased, and the building returned to its peaceful state. The renovations continued, and the coffee shop thrived, unaware of the dark history that had been put to rest. Steve returned to his new life, free from the nightmares that had plagued him. He found solace in his work, knowing he had made a difference. The memories of the hidden room and the spirits remained, but they no longer haunted him. Months later, Steve received a letter in the mail. It was from Sarah, his former co-worker at Starbucks. She had heard about his efforts to put the spirits to rest and wanted to thank him. The letter was a reminder of the connections he had made, the people who had supported him. Steve smiled as he read the letter, feeling a sense of closure. He knew he would never forget the experiences that had shaped him, but he was ready to move forward. The past was behind him, and a new chapter awaited. The rain continued to fall outside, a constant backdrop to the hum of life. But for Steve, the storm had passed, and the future was filled with hope.